everyone, and welcome back to Cat's Corner. My name is Kayla, and today we are going to be talking about one of the most awesome and exciting things in the world, aka therapy. The reason that I wanted to bring up the idea of therapy and going to therapy is because it might be something, with this new year of 2021, that you might be interested in or thinking about, and it's good to have information about therapy before you try and dive in. And that's kind of what I want to provide. So in this video, we're going to go over just some general, concepts involving therapy. We're going to talk about what you can expect beforehand, what can you expect during, and we're also going to talk about confidentiality. And all of this is coming from a therapist. So it is my hope that this information will give you a little confidence when you're doing your search, and that you will find an awesome therapist who can serve you. So the first concept that I want to talk about in relation to therapy is one that is becoming increasingly more known, but the more that we talk about it, the less the stigma is. So I want to say that you can go to therapy for any reason. You do not have to have a problem to go see a therapist. You do not have to have experienced trauma to go see a therapist, or even have a diagnosable mental health disorder or condition. You can see a therapist for any reason, even if that reason is you are so happy in your life right now and you just want someone to talk to, or you want to work on self-improvement. Therapy is for anyone in any kind of situation. So you don't need to worry about whether or not you qualify for it or if it's something you should be doing. The answer is yes, you can do it whenever you want. The second idea I want to talk about when it comes to therapy is that it's a good idea to do a little bit of research beforehand. If you have a specific agency or organization that you think you're going to go with to find a therapist, I would suggest looking at their website and seeing if they have profiles or bios for their therapists, and then to read through them. Things that you're going to want to think about, first of all, are what type of therapy do I want to pursue? And there are lots of different types, and you can Google some of this information, but do you want to do individual therapy? Do you want to try a therapy group? Do you want to do family therapy? Do you want a very specific kind? Like, do you want to find a creative arts therapist, a music therapist, an art therapist, a drama therapist? So you're really going to want to think about what type of therapy might fit you and your needs best. And then after that, once you decide, what kind of therapy you might want to pursue, then I would look at the therapists themselves and do a little research on what we call theoretical orientation. Now, that's just a big fancy way of saying how your therapist practices and how they view the world. So there are lots of different theoretical orientations when it comes to therapy. Probably the most common you're going to find is called cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. In this process, the therapist chooses interventions, or the activities that you're going to do in the therapy session, chooses those interventions that are going to connect to this cognitive behavioral view, which says that your thoughts and your actions and your belief all influence each other and kind of cause a chain reaction with each other. So if you're in therapy with a cognitive behavioral therapist, you're going to do a lot of hands-on and concrete work about what are my thoughts, what do they lead to when I act this way, what's the belief behind that, what was I thinking? So some people really like that. Other types of theoretical orientations might include person-centered. This is more open, it's about the relationship, it's unconditional positive regard, it's very accepting, and there isn't a whole lot of structure, it's way more free flow. And then you might look at more different types. Again, there might be drama therapists, and they might have their own specific theoretical orientations, or a music therapist or an art therapist. So it's important to kind of look those things up. And if you don't know something, you can always Google it and see if you can find something. And it's important to find that orientation that fits how you want the relationship with your therapist to be, because that's going to influence all of the activities and the interventions that you do during therapy. You don't have to find a perfect match, and you don't have to know everything about that orientation, but it's good to have a view beforehand. The third general concept about therapy that I wanted to talk about is the idea that it does take some time, sometimes it's a lot of time, to grow into a therapeutic relationship. This means that you are given this therapist with this specific orientation and you're going to work with them. It takes time to build trust and build a relationship, so you might not feel like you hit it off right away. But every situation is unique, right? Your needs mixed with this therapist are going to kind of be their own thing. And that means that you need to give it a little time to sink in, but also that you can be aware of when things aren't working. It is always okay to try and see a different therapist. If you think the therapist that you have just isn't working and you're not clicking and you've tried to make some adjustments, it's okay to try and find someone else, maybe someone with a different theoretical orientation or just a different person in general. The therapist that you have is not going to be offended by that, and because they want you to find what's going to work best. So it's always a good idea to give the benefit of a doubt and give some time for things to really sink in and for you to start working. But know that all of the therapists are always available to you and you have the power to choose. So next I wanted to talk about what might happen during your first couple sessions or even before your first session. One of the first things that you're going to do, regardless of if you go to a private place for therapy or an agency, is that you're going to have to sign what are called informed consent documents. Basically, these documents kind of go over your rights as a client, and they talk about, what you will be engaging in therapy, what are you agreeing to, just so you know everything about the process and about confidentiality and about how you're going to be treated throughout this whole process. So you'll sign those documents and you'll have the opportunity to read through them and probably take home a copy of them. And your therapist should also, give you some time to discuss that with them. If you ever have any questions about informed consent or, anything related to therapy, it's always a good idea to ask your therapist, and I'm sure they will be more than happy to answer that so that you feel confident going forward. After your informed consent kind of process, where you talk about all of the details of therapy, you're probably going to answer a bunch of questions in what we tend to call an intake interview. Again, this might happen before you start therapy or it might happen during your first session. But basically, your therapist is going to have a list of questions that they're going to ask you. They're probably semi-structured, which means that they have specific questions, but they can go more in depth if you want or you have more to say. But they're basically going to ask you about your life, about your mental health history, about your family, about your job, how you're currently feeling, what you want to work on, what goals that you have for therapy, and everything like that. Because your therapist wants to have the most accurate information as they can, because they might have to make a diagnosis. They want to be able to create goals for you so that you have something to work towards during therapy. And they just want to get to know you better so that they can choose the best interventions for what you might need. So those are two things that you want to expect before therapy. And now I want to segue into talking a little bit about what might happen during therapy. So you might be used to that stereotypical idea of therapy that you see on TV a lot, of someone laying on the kind of big Freudian couch while the therapist sits there with a notepad, or, two people sitting in a room and they're both stuck to these chairs and the one therapist has the notepad and they're staring at the other person. I'm here to say that really, truly is not what therapy is like. Therapy in general is more of a conversation and it involves activities. But therapy isn't just talking. The point of therapy is not to come to someone's office to talk to them for 45 minutes or an hour and leave. The point of therapy is that during the intake interview, you and your therapist create what are called treatment goals. And treatment goals are, during the time that I am with my therapist, these are the things that I am working on. It could be wanting to reduce anger, building coping skills, learning how to relax, reducing arguments, a whole gamut of things could be a goal. But you're going to establish those goals together as a team, so you know exactly what you're working towards. And then after you establish those goals, your therapist is then going to try and come up with interventions, which are activities that you do or things that you talk about that will help you reach that goal. So for example, if your goal is you want to learn how to relax or build more relaxation into your week, your therapist might have the interventions of teaching you how to meditate, teaching you a progressive relaxation exercise, or doing some guided imagery. And those would be the interventions that you do to reach that goal. So of course, during therapy, you're going to talk and you're going to process a lot of stuff, but it's not just talking, it is talking with a purpose always. Another thing that is important during the therapy process and that you'll also see during the intake interview is a lot of times with insurance, in order to get services, your therapist will have to give you some kind of code from the DSM. Now, it is unethical and illegal to give your client a diagnosis when they don't actually have a diagnosable mental health condition. And again, you can come to therapy for any reason, so you don't have to have a diagnosable mental health condition. So what your therapist will probably do, if you don't fall into that category, is they will give you what is called a Z code in the back of the DSM, which is the big psychological book about mental disorders and medical things like that. There are what are called Z codes, where they're more about just life circumstances. So they could give a Z code for struggling with parent-child relationships, for struggling with sibling relationships, for homelessness, for a very wide variety of things. So they might be able to find a Z code that fits whatever it is that you came in to work on, and then that will go into your chart to help bill for insurance. So don't get freaked out if you see a code or if someone explains this to you. A lot of times it's just what needs to be. One last concept that I want to talk about in relation to therapy and during the actual, therapeutic change process is the idea that in therapy, the client always has the power. I think that's just such an important thing to stress, is that you're coming to see this person, and yes, they are trained, and yes, they're there to help you, but you are the one who is in control of the situation, and thus change happens when you want to change. So you never have to answer a question that makes you feel uncomfortable or that you don't want to answer, and the therapist shouldn't press you to answer. You don't have to do interventions or activities that you don't want to do in that moment. You are in charge of what happens during therapy. Now, that's not saying that your therapist might not push you a bit and try and challenge you to try new things or to practice something, but still, they are waiting for you to give them the permission and the power to work with that. So just always know that as the client, we want what's best for you, and we're looking out for what's best for you, and we hope that you are able to tell us that, and we give you the power in the session to make change and to grow as a person at your own pace. All right, the last concept that I want to talk about, in this kind of introduction to therapy is the idea of confidentiality. Confidentiality is very important to therapists. It is one of the, ethical standards that we absolutely must uphold, and we take it very, very seriously. Confidentiality means that what you tell your therapist during a session, they will not share with anyone else. There are only a handful of exceptions to this rule. First, if you say that you are planning on hurting yourself or that you are currently hurting yourself, they might have to share information. If you say that you are planning on hurting someone else or are currently hurting someone else, they will have to share. If a court of law subpoenas their notes or those kinds of things, they do need to turn those over. If someone is hurting you, then they will need to report that, especially if you are a minor. All therapists are mandatory reporters. And then finally, they can share information with anyone that you choose to disclose that information to. So if you want to tell a parent about what's happening or a spouse about what's happening, and you want your therapist to be able to share that, you will sign a document that says, I release this information, and you will talk about it with your therapist, and then they have the permission to share that information. But they will not share it unless you give the permission. We do these things, these little exceptions, mainly for safety, right? We want to make sure that we are giving you the resources that you need in case you are in a crisis situation. So sometimes confidentiality is broken, but most of the time it is held to the highest standard. All right, that was my overview of some things that you might want to think about before you join therapy, some things about what therapy is actually like, and then some ideas that relate to confidentiality. So I hope you found this video informative and that it might help you with your therapy journey. I'd love to hear any feedback or comments that you have, and I hope that you have a fantastic 2021 and that it's a big year of growth and change. Have a good day.